So thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you joining today's webinar. My name is Sanjeev Verma. I'm chairman and co-founder of Prevail. We provide end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing systems for CMMC and ITAR and DFARS compliance. Today marks a pivotal moment in the CMMC journey, and it's been a journey. The program has successfully navigated all the necessary approvals from the executive branch of the government, including, as we understand, the White House. The CMMC program is now set to be published as a final rule in the Federal Register under CFR 32 very soon. While it technically requires congressional approval, this is, as we understand, generally a routine process. For the rule to be overturned, Congress and the Senate would have to reject it, with the president also concurring, an unlikely scenario given the national security implications. In short, the CMMC program is here to stay, and it will significantly impact the entire defense industrial base. The objective of today's webinar is to answer two critical questions. How will the CMMC program be rolled out? And what should DIB contractors consider to determine their own readiness timeline? Our focus today will be on CMMC Level 2, which applies to approximately 80,000 organizations that handle controlled unclassified information, or CUI. The premise of Level 2 is straightforward. Contractors will need a third-party assessment to verify their ability to safeguard sensitive CUI in alignment with the 110 security controls outlined in NIST 171. It's important to note that contractors are already contractually obligated to protect CUI under the very same controls through their existing DFAR 7012 clauses. The CMMC assessments will be conducted by CMMC third-party assessment organizations, also called C3PAOs. We are fortunate to have with us today Matt Travis, the Chief Executive Officer of CyberAB, the organization responsible for vetting and setting accreditation standards for C3PAOs and consultants. Matt brings a wealth of experience from both the government and private sectors. He previously served as the first Deputy Director for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security at CISA, overseeing day-to-day operations at the nation's premier civilian cybersecurity agency. He also served as the White House liaison to the United States Navy Secretary and is a former naval officer. Please join me in welcoming perhaps the ultimate authority on this, Matt Travis.
Sanjeev, good to be with you. Thanks to you and your colleagues for the invitation. I'll correct you on that front piece there. I am certainly not the ultimate authority. That would, of course, be the Department of Defense, but we are happy to serve in the role that we do, which is we are the accreditation body for this program, the exclusive accreditation body. And so I'll say up front, as I often do when I engage in public speaking, nothing I say today should be construed as representing the Department of Defense and the U.S. government. We support the Pentagon through a no-cost contract, but we don't speak for DoD. But I recall a year ago, Sanjeev, when I spoke at your annual summit, we still had a lot of questions last October 31st, whatever it was. And in almost a year's time, we certainly know a lot more. And there's been a lot of progress in rulemaking. And so I'm happy to talk about that and kind of give my perspective on where things stand. When we set this webinar up, we called it 6 months to CMMC. And I've amended that based on some developments in rulemaking as well as our understanding of the timeline. So I think we're closer than 6 months, to say the least.
Well, while you may yourself say that you're not the ultimate authority, which we absolutely understand, in our estimation, you are a very important authority that absolutely is at the center of the CMMC ecosystem. And so we, as well as the DIB, are very keen to hear your perspective. So the format for today's webinar is as follows. Matt will deliver a presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer session. And with that, I hand over the stage to Matt. Over to you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. And thanks for all of your clients, customers, and partners who are tuning in this afternoon. I'm going to walk through a number of discussion points. And as I noted there, I think we're closer than 6 months to CMMC. I should stress that I'm not inside the rulemaking tent, so all of this is really prognostication on my part. But I'll start with rulemaking because I think the timeline in terms of when else is going to start is very important to a lot of you who've been following CMMC and all of its twists and turns and fits and starts. And I've been there for most of that as well. And I'm pretty excited to be able to say that I think we are in the final throes of taxing down the runway, if you will. I just have a number of topics I would like to really speak to on the CMMC making a timeline, and then what START means for DIB companies. What does this actually mean when CMMC as a program starts? And then I would like to just share some perspective on what I think the decision is for defense contractors in terms of this is now here. There's been a lot of suspicion or skepticism that we may never get to this point. But now that we're here, DIB companies are going to have a choice of whether or not to, get on board or wait for something else to happen. I want to talk a bit about the implications for service providers as well as cloud service providers based on what the proposed rule says. We haven't seen that final rule. And then talk a bit about capacity and then what we're working on, and then looking forward to your questions. It's important to note, if you don't follow this closely, there are two CMMC rules that are in play. The Title 48 rule deals with the procurement and contractual requirements surrounding CMMC. This is often called the TFARS rule. So this is going to be the guidance that the contracting officers use to implement CMMC as a requirement in DoD contracts, and all of the conditions and consequences and the vagaries of all of that will be discussed in this Title 48 proposed rule. We are currently in the public comment period for that. So if you go to the reginfo.gov website, you can see the proposed rule, and comments will be open until mid-October. But this doesn't establish this program. This just deals with contractual matters. So while that's very important, we have been tracking probably more closely the actual program rule, the Title 32 rule. And both Title 32, Title 48 refers to the Code of Federal Regulations. That's where all federal rules are codified. And so this final rule, Title 32, Part 170, will establish CMMC as an official DoD program Code of Federal Regulations. So that gives the program real stability and formality. And this is not just some whim that DoD is doing for a while. This is a formally recognized in the Code of Federal Regulations DoD program. This is in its final stage. It's in the final rule. Now, we haven't seen it, but what Sanjeev talked about in the intro is that there's a long journey that these rules go through, and it just completed its second round of review by the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs, that's OIRA, as part of OMB. So the White House, just a couple of weeks ago, finished their review of the final rule, sent it back to the Pentagon. So we are literally on the doorsteps of seeing that final rule. It's my understanding that generally what this point was going on is, some formatting, final quality assurance on reading and punctuation, and then ultimately someone will have to sign it out of DoD. They then send it over to NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, and then it gets lined up for publication in the Federal Register. This time of year, especially in an election year, at the end of a congressional period, oftentimes administrations are trying to get a lot of rules published. So there might be a bit of a backlog in terms of when it actually gets published in the Federal Register. Now, once we do see it published, and I do think that will be in a matter of weeks, not months, when we do see it, there will be an activation date of when this rule is actually effective and in force. Won't be the date that we see in the Federal Register. It'll be a date that's in the final rule saying CMMC program is effective and in force on this day forward. Now, generally, at minimum, it'll be 60 days because there's a congressional review period that generally they want to cover for in that gap between publication and the rule taking effect for major rules. It could be longer, it could be 90 days, but we've been just assuming it's 60, just kind of based on what generally you see in federal rulemaking. So that's the date when CMMC will begin as a federal program that's up and running. Now, Sanjeev mentioned the congressional review. Well, what about that? Don't we have to wait for that to finish? Normally, that 60 days or 90 days is what's given for Congress to review it. But the congressional rule, and I won't get all wonky on the Congressional Review Act of 1996. I did a bit of that last night in the town hall. But in essence, Congress has 60 days of in-session days when Congress, both the House and or the Senate, are in session. And there are days of session days left in this rule because it's an election year and Congress will be adjourning. So it kicks to the next Congress. It's called the look-back mechanism. So the next Congress, which is the 119th Congress, which will convene on the 3rd of January, will then get 60 days to review the CMMC Title 32 rule. And it's, again, as Sanjeev mentioned, their only option is to negate it, to cancel it. And that would require the House to vote it down, the Senate to vote it down actively, and then the president, whoever that might be, to sign it. Can't pause it, they can't delay it, they can't edit it or tweak it. They actually have to take an affirmative action to vote to stop the rule, which is highly unlikely, and we really shouldn't even spend any time talking about that. What we should recognize, however, is that review period in the next Congress, CMMC doesn't have to wait for that to happen. So we are in mid-September. At least that's when OIRA completed that Title 32 review. The Title 48 public comment period will expire on October 15th, and we keep going to the right. I think if you look at the time delay between when the Title 32 rule was in a proposed state, this is last year in 2023, OIRA finished its review November 21st, and we saw the proposed rule on December 26th. So a little over. So if we just apply that same precedent to now, if OIRA finished the review of the final Title 32 rule on 15 September, we could see the actual final rule published in the Federal Register towards the back half of October. And then if our assumption is true and there's a 60-day delay or, the window before it goes into force, we're actually looking at CMMC starting before the end of the calendar year, which could be in the final days or weeks of December. That is place we project it could start. But that's less sooner than we were projecting because we thought the rule had to wait for congressional review to be finished. It does not. In the unlikely event that Congress were to vote it down, they can still vote it down after CMMC's been up and running for a few months. So that congressional review will likely start from January to March. But CMMC as a program will be up and running in December if this timeline or something close to it holds. So that's been watching town halls. I always talk about we don't expect CMMC to start earlier than March. Change that now. I expect that the earliest it could possibly be starting towards the end of December. So that might change some holiday planning for some of us or many of us, but we'll have to see how it plays out. But we are in the final stages. That's the headline that I would take away, that we're in the final throes of the long and winding rulemaking process. Now, this just means that CMMC starts the program. Until that Title 48 rule finishes its journey and lands, there won't be any CMMC requirements in DoD contracts. So when CMMC starts, it's essentially a voluntary program. But let me talk a bit about what that means. When CMMC starts as an authorized program without the mandatory contractual element to it, it's going to mean that, one, all those companies who got assessed in joint surveillance, this is the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, that's still ongoing. It's been ongoing since August of 2022, in which DIP companies have implemented 800-171, want to get assessed, got a joint assessment with the DIPCAC and the C3PO. And in the proposed rule, that's going to equate to a level 2 certification when CMMC starts. So theoretically, on day one, all those companies, we've got, I think, close to 150 or so now, will get a level 2 certification. In addition, any DIP company that is ready to go, who implemented CMMC, and as Sanjeev correctly pointed out, many of you actually have that requirement already in your existing DoD contract or subcontract, that 7012 clause, which requires you to implement NIST 800-171. All CMMC provides is a third-party verification and certification that you've done it. Theoretically, there should be a lot of companies ready to get certified when CMMC starts. And so C3POs, right now we have 57 authorized C3POs. We expect we'll have a handful more by the end of this calendar year, hopefully to 70. They are going to be reauthorized by us once we see the final rule, and they'll be eligible to conduct and certify companies at level 2 who have implemented 800-171 and meet all the requirements. And so we may not see the actual mandatory requirements for certification contracts for months to come after that. But I think you're going to see a healthy contingent of DIB companies who have not only talk the talk, but walk the when it comes to cybersecurity, are going to be in an advantageous position to be able to get certified and then express that state of certification to their primes, to their business partners, to their employees, to their DoD clients. And so when you think, if you have the mindset of just wait until someone forces me to get certified, I do think there are a large number of companies who see it the other way, that see the differentiation in the market that certification provides. Now, in full disclosure, I'm not necessarily an impartial advocate here, right? I believe in CMMC as a great way to manage digital risk for the Department of Defense. Obviously, we kind of rely on the economic activity at CMMC to support our operations. But that notwithstanding, I've been in the DIB. I've had my own company that did government contracting. And the last thing I would want to do is concede a market advantage to competitors who have something that they can show in waves saying, I take cybersecurity seriously. I take my clients, the protection of our data seriously. And I actually did what my contract I agreed to do, and I had a third party validate it. That's not asking too much. And I think a lot of companies are going to see that's an easy win to go ahead and get that certification. So item 3, really, I think for a lot of DIB companies is what side of that decision point are you going to be? There are a lot of metaphors that have been used in CMMC. I'll try one, which is not a train running you over. The train's coming, and it's going to run you over. If you don't get on it, it's going to stop at the platform and leave you behind. And those companies who have taken this requirement seriously, even though it's been kind of winding its way through 2 administrations, multiple rounds of rulemaking, DoD has always been very clear they were committed to this. And that might not always been obvious in terms of how fast things were moving. But they've been very determined, very methodical about getting this right and getting it done the right way. And we're at that point now where the train's pulling up at the station. There are great parts of the DIB who have understood the importance of this, who respects the terms of the contract they've already signed and agreed to, and have taken these steps to implement the CMMC standard. And either through joint surveillance or once CMMC starts, they're going to avail themselves of the certification opportunity and get on that CMMC train, which is going to take them to future eligibility for DoD contract awards. And then there's going to be those DIB companies who are going to stand on the platform and say, well, I'm not quite ready to get on that train, or I think this is just a one-way trip and I'm not going to have to get on that train. And I do think they'll be left behind, not just from a market differentiation perspective, but I do think there'll be more and more primes. We're not going to wait for the Title 48 rule to impose this requirement on their supply chains, on their subcontractors. And as condition of doing business with them, they're going to insist that their companies get certified now that CMMC is up and running and certifications are available. So if you're in the DIB watching, I would certainly talk to colleagues in the C-suite and your CISO. And if you haven't started getting engaged in CMMC, by gosh, now the time to do it was probably early this year at the latest, but now the light's flashing red that we are getting close to this train pulling in, this program launching off the launch pad, whatever metaphor you want to use. And I hate to think that there are going to be some companies, some contractors left behind. So there are some important elements in getting certified, in addition to just meeting the 110 level 2 security requirements. There are implications for a managed service provider or an MSSP, a managed security service provider that DIB companies might be using. And in the proposed rule, at least, the requirement there is that they need to also get certified at level 2. We'll see what the final rule looks like. There wasn't all this detail on how they get scoped or how an MSP that probably doesn't have a DoD contract gets entered into AS, which is the government's IT system of record for CMMC. So some details were left out. But assuming that holds, MSPs, MSSPs need to get level 2 certified. So if you're out there in the DIB and you're using an MSP, you need to be having that conversation now about, hey, what are your plans for getting engaged in CMMC so that when it comes time for me to get certified, you're not holding me back. Because if you are outsourcing a number of services especially security services, to a third-party external service provider, they are part of your assessment, and they need to know that now, and likely will have to get themselves certified as well. So that's different from the cloud service provider clause in the proposed rule. It's also in the DFAR 7012 rule, and this is something I know that Prevail is intimately familiar with. But for cloud service providers, the requirement is you either FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. And the enduring question is always, well, what does equivalency mean and how is that determined? DoD issued a memo back in last December. I think I've just got a screenshot of the David Kewen, who's the deputy CIO, 3-page memo that talks about what FedRAMP moderate equivalency entails. And in short, there's a button you get from the link there. If you Google it, DoD FedRAMP moderate equivalency memo, it'll come up. The takeaways here are that to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent, your CP needs to hire a FedRAMP 3PO, not a CMMC C3PO, but a FedRAMP 3PO, and do a FedRAMP assessment. All the requirements full up, attest that the cloud service offering from that CSP meets the FedRAMP standard. And with that, there's what's called a body of evidence that has a whole, probably a couple of dozen documents that essentially compose the body of evidence showing that you do meet the FedRAMP equivalency. When you're getting assessed, when you, the OSD, you, the DIP company, are getting assessed by a C3PO or right now by DIPCAC, you have to show that body of evidence. You have to say, I hired the CSP to provide cloud service to my company. Here is the attestation from the FedRAMP 3PO. Here is the body of evidence from the pen tests and the scans and the SSP and the reporting, all that stuff that's required. And what the assessors are doing is essentially just reviewing that body of evidence. They're not reevaluating all the elements, all the documents there. Are they complete? Are they intact? Are they within periodicity? Some things that might be time-bound. And if it's all there and your shared responsibility matrix being maintained and you could validate that, then you can move on to getting certified. What's important to note is that this is a point-in-time determination, equivalency. Equivalency is not like certification that's good for 3 years. So theoretically, a CSP that provides the DIP company its body of evidence that it meets FedRAMP model equivalency is good for that moment when the assessors are reviewing the body of evidence. It could have been that they weren't equivalent 2 days prior, because maybe that body of evidence was missing something. And it doesn't mean that they're going to still be equivalent next week if they met the requirements for this assessment. So it's a point-in-time determination that assessment team makes. I know that has implications in terms of precedent and how is that communicated throughout the DIB if someone is no longer seen as equivalent. But again, it's really only for that assessment by that memo of when equivalency is recognized and concurred. And it's the OSC's responsibility, no one else's, to ensure that the body of evidence is there. You can't outsource your security to a cloud service provider. Happy to take questions on that, but that's an important point. Just like with MSPs or MSSPs, you need to be having a conversation with the cloud provider. Because for them, that's not a need to get CMMC certified. You need to get the FedRAMP model equivalency if they're not already on the FedRAMP marketplace with an ATO. One of the things that we are keen to continue doing is building ecosystem capacity, right? This is a market-based approach that DoD has opted for, which we think is obviously the right approach, but it requires engagement of industry to become part of the ecosystem. From the cadre of registered practitioners, these are the consultants who are helping companies start their CMMC journey, implement the 800-171 requirements, and prepare for a CMMC assessment. RPs, RPAs, RPOs. Obviously, all of the approved training providers and approved publishing partners who put together the training program for CCAs and CCPs to take those courses to become certified assessors are important. We've got plenty of C3POs. We need more, but we've got over 400 that applied. Like I said, 57 have made it through the process. We'll be reauthorizing them shortly, and we hope many more make it through the journey. They too have to demonstrate conformity to the 800-171 standard. I'm not sure all 400 will make it across the finish line, but I'm confident we'll have a healthy cadre of C3POs. The limiting factor is really the individual CCAs, because you could have hundreds of C3POs, but there are not enough assessors for them to hire, and they're in a pickle. So if there's a recruiting pitch that I always try to make anytime I'm engaging folks on CMMC, it's think about becoming an assessor yourself or spread the word to friends and family, because it's a great professional opportunity in terms of getting into cybersecurity or expanding your skill sets in cybersecurity. It can be lucrative from a financial standpoint. These are going to be highly sought individuals conducting assessments of high consequence. I think it's probably a flexible lifestyle. Probably involves some interesting travel, meet a lot of dip companies, do good work that's meaningful and compelling for our nation's security. That's all good stuff. And so it does require some investment, take the courses and pass exams. But ultimately, we need a very healthy and growing CCA cadre in order for CMMC to be a success. So I suspect you'll be hearing more from that from us and the KGO, hopefully DoD, once they can start talking again, because we need to build that core group of CCAs. So then I'll end with this in terms of what we're working on. So if I'm right or close to right, this CMMC is going to be up and running either close to the end of the year or early 2025. We still have a lot of work to do to get critical documents finished and critical functions up and running. I'll run through some of these. A lot of people ask us about this is the CCA requirements. Just to remind everyone, the proposed rule lists what the requirements are. It's not just you take that CCA course and pass exam. You need to have years of experience, both in terms of cybersecurity experience, as well as assessment or audit experience. You need to pass that Tier 3 background investigation, and you need to possess at least one of the professional certifications that's listed in DoD Manual 8140.03. So there's more to being a CCA than just taking the CCA course and test. You can check that out there at the link in terms of all the specific requirements, or check the federal rule, proposed rule. So the CMMC assessment process, over the CAP, is a document that really guides the consistency of a CMMC Level 2 assessment. You think about NIST 800-171 is the technical standard, and you think 171 Alpha is the authoritative standard on how how those security requirements are evaluated. DoD has supplemental guidance and assessment guides and scoping guides and action guides. We have the CAP, which again is the procedural guide on how an assessment should be conducted. We want to make sure that assessments are consistent and that they're not different from ones done on the West Coast to ones done on the East Coast. We are currently revising and finalizing that document. We put out an initial version a couple of years ago. I think the one that we eventually published will be a lot different, tighter, and leaner. So we're working on that. It has to incorporate all of the program requirements that deal with the Level 2 assessment that are in the proposed rule and ultimately the final rule. So you're not going to see this until after the final rule is published. Same with the Code of Professional Conduct. There was been an initial code out there, or COPC as we call it, since the very early days of CMMC. That's being updated, providing more clarity and hopefully more kind of examples of conflicts of interest, how to mitigate them, disclose them, avoid them. So we're looking forward to getting that out too after the final rule is published. I mentioned we got to reauthorize all the C3POs to all the requirements that are in the final rule. And then EMAS, that IT system of record, we've got to make sure that the C3POs have access to it, that they're trained on EMAS, and they understand the protocols, upload assessment information into EMAS, because it's EMAS, not SPRS, the IT system of record for CMMC. We've got some updates to our own marketplace on the CyberAB website, as well as workflows to incorporate the submission of some of these new requirements for assessors, for example. And then the C3PO accreditation scheme is that body of requirements to which we'll accredit all the C3POs. They start off as authorized C3POs, meaning they've met the requirements to be a C3PO. And then once we get going, we then accredit them to ensure that they are discharging their duties in accordance with international conformity standards, as well as CMMC requirements. And then on a practical note, certification connotes that there's a certificate. So OSCs who get certified need to have a certificate documenting that, their ISO requirements and what's on there. DoD's giving us guidance on what's on there. So we're working with the department as well as C3POs to kind of design what that actual certification document, that certificate looks like. So we've got a lot of work between now and whenever CMMC starts, whether that's in a couple months or several months. Exciting because it's all becoming real very quickly here, very soon. Final pitch I'll make early, then I'm happy to take questions with Sajeev. We have our own CMMC event coming up in November called Seek East. This is a combination of what we've done the past 2 years in terms of our ecosystem summit. We partnered with the folks behind the CMMC Implementation Conference, which has also been around about 2 years. I think this will be right around the time. Obviously, we're gearing up for CMMC launch. So if you haven't attention, consider attending Seek East here at the Gaylord National Resort, right across the street from our offices where I'm now in National Harbor, Maryland. And there's the website. Hope to see many of you there, either in person or virtually. And with that, Sanjeev, I will stop talking and happy to take your questions or any questions from the audience.
Well, thank you very much, Matt, for that comprehensive overview. A lot of the questions that I'm actually posing are going to be kind of digging into the information that you provided. You've provided us with a lot of very critical and important information. But my role, I think, today is to echo what's on the minds of a lot of DIB companies and sort of dig a little bit deeper in and ask you questions to get clarity on some of the material that you may have covered. So I'm going to kick it off with my first question pertaining more to the role of CyberAB in the broader rollout of CMMCs. Could you explain the role CyberAB will play in the rollout of CMMC? And specifically, how will your organization help shape and support the implementation of CMMC as it becomes more widely adopted? I know you discussed a lot of this sort of short-term initiatives, but what's the role that you expect to play as it becomes more widely adopted?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sonny. So in short, we need to start really focusing on our core mission, which is accreditation body. And really for the past, over 3 years now, we've played a lot of roles, hosting town halls, doing webinars, trying to keep the ecosystem together while we're waiting for rulemaking, which is not things that accreditation body normally does. The whole practitioner program of credentialing practitioners to help DIB companies get started, important work. But as we turn towards CMMC starting, you'll see our focus really aligned with our accreditation mission, accrediting those authorizing and accrediting the C3POs to ensure trust and confidence in CMMC. That really is our primary mission. It's not our program, but because DoD has not been able to be very vocal during rulemaking, we've kind of by default found ourselves on stage, often kind of speaking on behalf of the program unofficially. I hope that we can kind of retreat from that a little bit, and DoD will be more present to speak for the program. We're certainly happy to continue to evangelize for CMMC because we believe in it, and we want to see it succeed. But you'll see us focus more on accreditation. Impartiality is huge. We have to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest when certification assessments are being conducted. We have to make sure we're free of conflict of interest. Any conflicts we have in terms of mitigating or avoiding conflicts are transparent and documented. We have a role in the appeals process that's important, meaning if an OSC disagrees with the assessment of a C3PO, the first appeal goes to the corporate C3PO. Individuals not affiliated with the actual assessment team. But the second level, if there is one, comes to us. So we have to establish what that process is and really focus on making sure that that is trusted. So it's really instilling trust and confidence is the primary mission that you'll see us focus on.
Well, with that, I'm going to now start digging into this alphabet soup that many of us are familiar with, but the audience probably still gets into a doozy with that. So before we dive into the details, I'd appreciate if you could give the audience an overview of 3 contract clauses from DFARS, which is 7012, 7020, and 7021. As we all know, these are critical clauses for current and future contracts. So it's essential to understand what they require from contractors, and I want to make sure that everybody has that grounding established as we delve deeper into the questions that will follow. So take it away, 2012, 20, and 21. What are these things?
Happy to, because CMC, as you know well, Sanjeev, can be very confusing from a terminology and numerology perspective. I was just talking about CFR Title 48, Title 32. That's a Code of Federal Regulations. DFARS is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. This is the body of rules that guide how duty contracts are let and maintained. So the 7012, this is in section 252, 204, 7012 of DFARS, lays out those initial, if you go back and you had a timeline, this was DoD's first attempt at forcing on the DIB responsibility to protect COI and FCI through implementation of 800-171. So you'll often hear, probably more so than the others, the 7012 clause. Do you have the 7012 clause in your contract? If you do that, means you have a requirement to implement all 110 security requirements of NIST 800-171 revision 2, not 3, 2, and that contractual requirement if you have that DFARS clause, as well as the FedRAMP model equivalency, incident reporting. There's more than just the 800-171. So that's established that requirement. And DOD's hope back then, I think, was that all companies would, it's in the contract, they're going to do it. Found out over time that probably wasn't worked out so well. So they then established enforcement mechanisms. And they actually, those firstly, the 7019 clause was the kind of the advanced notice of impending requirements. And then the 7020 clause established those requirements, meaning you have to do your own assessment and enter it into SPRS, which is the Supplier Procurement Reporting System, if I have that correct. Essentially, the portal to require you officially to do an assessment, enter in the score, or also be subject to a DCMA, DIPCAC high assessment. And so it's that 20 clause that said, okay, you've had the requirement, but now this is the enforcement mechanism. And unfortunately, over time, the department realized that self-reporting into SPRS, as they started doing analysis, was also not instilling trust and confidence in and the integrity of those scores. So that's where CMMC comes into play. And that's what the 7021 clause is going to be. That's really the placeholder for the CMMC DFARS clause that you see in Title 48, which gives the requirement to get a third-party certification if your contract has that clause in it. And that's going to be a contract-by-contract basis, whether you have a level 1 requirement, level 2, or a level 3. So if you have a level 1, you're still doing a self-assessment, but level 2 and level 3 is when you're getting into needing a C3PAO. So in short, that's what those 3 clauses speak to. And the 21 clause has always been the placeholder for CMMC. If you recall, CMMC 1.0, there was an initial interim final rule that was going to go in that place, and then DoD pulled it back when they decided to recalibrate CMMC with the 2.0 version of the program.
So in essence, at basically 7021, which is CMMC, basically says, look, you've had the NIST 800-171 requirements. If you have a 7012 clause in your contract, we're just going to audit you now with a third-party audit. But you are supposed to implement and be ready with those 800-171 clauses because they are in your current contract.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's dig a little bit deeper into the key dates. You spoke very eloquently about the sort of rulemaking timeline. I'd like you to be the wise sage and tell us a little bit about what's the rollout timeline. What do you think? Again, I know you don't know the exact answers, but what do you think can be expected in terms of CMMC requirements appearing in contracts? And what kind of a phased rollout do you anticipate occurring? Because those things have been specified by the DoD.
Yeah, this is a DoD responsibility on how they're going to implement it, right? As I said, we are focused on once the program's up and running, we're in business, and we believe there's going to be a strong demand for certification regardless of what it's required in a contract. But to your question, for the first date that needs to drop is when the Title 48 rule is final and then effective in force. And that will be into sometime in 2025, I suspect, given where it is. Public comments not ending until next month. And then in that 48, there will be established timelines for implementation. If you look at the Title 32 rule, which kind of spoke to at least DoD's initial plans in the Title 32 proposed rule, it was these 6-month windows or six-month phases where I think the first phase, it's all voluntary self-assessments, and then you start seeing requirements entered in subsequent 6-month increments. We'll have to see if that holds in the final rules for both 32 and 48. But I would think that regardless, you could see those requirements in contracts the back end of next calendar year at the earliest, I would imagine. Potentially, we'll have to see. But DoD has always been very conscious of phasing the implementation, a lot of considerations, but one of them is what's the size of the ecosystem and what's the capacity, but they don't want to put it in every contract and then realize that we don't have enough C3POs or assessors. So this was always planned, and I give DoD credit for this, as the long game. Let's implement this in a phased approach over time. Let's understand the context and the environment of the ecosystem and adjust accordingly.
Now I'm going to dig in a little bit, Matt, into the notion of certification versus being prepared. And I'd like you to put on the hat of an organization that is deliberating their strategy about being compliant, being certified, or prepared. So, while the CMMC program will be phased in over 7 years, giving companies the flexibility in timing their certification, could you elaborate on the risks of delaying? And more specifically, how might organizations that opt to delay but aren't fully prepared jeopardize their ability to bid on contracts that require certification? So I wanted you to draw the distinctions and think about it from the perspective of organizations seeking compliance.
Yeah, I think the decision rationale changes once CMMC is up and running, and for this reason, right? So you could say, well, they've always had the 7012 clause. They've always needed to implement 800-171 and self-assess. And so even though they might think, okay, we'll do that, but let's not go ahead and get certified. Remember, once CMMC begins and the phase implementation starts, we're heading to an environment where you have to be certified in order to be eligible for contract award. So it's no longer that. It used to be the only risk was if DoD calls you on it, if you have an internal whistleblower, you'd be in violation of the False Claims Act. That's still in effect when CMMC starts, but the other consequence is you won't be eligible to win a DoD contract. And if you're only focused on the current contracts you currently have, well, you're going to cancel yourself out of being eligible for other contracts. So I do think, again, having been in the DIB myself, the responsible long-term approach is DoD has signaled in no uncertain terms that at a point in time very soon, they're only going to want to do business with companies who can prove their cybersecurity hygiene through third-party validation and certification. And that's the way the world's going to work. And so you can play calendar games and try to hold out as long as you can, but there could be a bow wave of demand. As I said, if there's only so many C3POs, and you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle where there's a procurement coming down the tracks and you're not going to be eligible to be awarded because you can't get a certification scheduled in time. I think you're playing with some dangerous factors if you wait that long. That decision rationale seems clear to me that once CMMC is up and running, the investment will be worth the certification, given all that I just kind of walked through.
So I'm going to belabor the point over here, Matt. So as we understand it, 100 of assessments, maybe 1,000 next year, and then a growing number, probably in 3 to 4 years, every company needs to be certified. So I'm a smaller contractor and I say, well, it's going to be so many 100 next year. Why don't I just not do anything and wait till like 2 or 3 years? Because the mindset that they may have is, well, somebody's going to call on them. I'd like you to once again talk to this issue. Is somebody going to call on you, or is it?
Well, I think, I think the prime you make, to put aside False Claims Act, put aside eligibility for a DoD award, I believe, because I know we're already seeing it. Some of the large primes have made it clear that they're already working the phones, calling up their suppliers and their subcontractors saying, we expect you to get started and get certified. Tell us when you're certified, if they haven't gone through joint surveillance once this starts. So you're at risk of losing your teaming agreements with your primes if they've decided that, hey, we're not going to wait for this to show up in our contract. A lot of work in business with DoD. We want to, show them that we are trusted partners, and we want to get certified as soon as it's available. And we want to show a unified front with our supply chain that they've done the same. I think that's probably the bigger risk than, because to your point, but the Title 40 rule is going to take effect in the phase implementation. It's going to be a little bit before the requirements are in a lot of contracts. I don't think it's going to be that long, but it's certainly not in it's not a 50-meter target right now. But boy, I think the primes have been the ones that really drive this more so than DoD contract language.
One final follow-up on this. Would you think that, there's this notion of being prepared, even if you aren't certified, being prepared for it? Would delaying preparation, what's your take on that?
No, because I think this is not something, and for those of the audience, I think you and your team at Prevail know this, this is not something you can just hand off to a mid-level IT manager and knock out in a few weeks. This is not checklist standard. 801.71 really speaks to a whole of business approach. Is cybersecurity, is basic cyber hygiene integrated and inculcated in how you operate your business. That's why it has the security requirements that it has. It's not just looking at one thing. Is cybersecurity truly part of how your business operates? That's what the standard is. That's what duty. Now, this isn't an audit. It's not an inspection. I've been a naval engineer. I know what a naval inspection is, and it's not fun. This is really to see, we've set a standard for doing business with DoD. Do you meet the standard? The assessor's job is to come in and assess if you meet the standard. But to meet that standard takes a while. You have to develop the policy. You have to develop an SSP. You've got to implement some technology. It is not something you just knock out over a weekend. So starting early is crucial, because invariably you're going to think you've met all of them, and then you got to bring in RP, RPO, or you're going to hire a CPO to do a mock assessment, and you're going to find out, this wasn't quite done efficiently or adequately to meet the standard. So it's going to take a while. You really do need to treat this. The leadership of the business needs to commit resources to it. I'm not saying that it's not non-trivial, or it's not trivial. This is an investment that needs to be planned for and budgeting. But the greatest advantage you have is time. And so starting early and starting now puts you in a much better position than waiting for all of a sudden you've got a countdown clock because your prime says you better be certified by a date certain, or DoD has a contract you want to go after, or what have you.
So, Matt, moving on to what happens once a company is certified, what are the next steps? So while you've spoken about the 110 controls and 110 score, we understand that an 88 is the minimum score to achieve certification. Could you clarify the implications of that score and also discuss the annual reaffirmation requirements for CMMC?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it quite that way, Sanjeev. 88 was the term that a lot of folks use for like joint surveillance. There is a very elaborate scoring methodology. It's in the proposed rule, section 170.24. Certain security requirements have a certain scoring value. There are certain requirements that can be POAM'd. There's certain requirements that can't be POAM'd. So coming up with the score is something everyone should get familiar with. And essentially in CMMC, you have to meet all the security requirements must be met, but you can have some that are POAM, but not all of them. So I really encourage everyone to look at that section of the rule 170.24, because the assessment team is going to come in, do the assessment. They're going to assess all 110 assessment, the requirements. There are over 320, I think, assessment objectives that you should be looking at, and they're all going to be met, not met. And depending which ones are either POAM'd or not, they're going to make a recommendation back to the C3PO headquarters for certification or not. That's going to undergo a QA review that's done by people not on the assessment team. And ultimately, the C3PO will make the decision to certify or not based on the assessment results and the recommendation of the QA review. And at that point, eventually a certificate will be generated and entered into EMAS, and we suspect the OSC will get a copy of that certificate as well. And then they're going to have to test on a yearly basis that they're still maintaining the conditions under which they were certified, because the certification gives you 3 years, but you're going to have to log back into SPRS and revalidate yourself that you're still maintaining the environment to the conditions that it was certified.
Matt, how will an organization initiate the certification process, and what role will CyberAB play in this? Can you walk us through the steps that a company needs to take to request certification?
Yes, our role is to put forth authorized C3POs who met all the requirements that are established both in the proposed rule and the requirements that we have. Once they've made it through that process to include their own 801.71 assessment by DIPCAC, they are authorized, and only authorized C3POs appear in our marketplace. CyberAB.org, you can go to the marketplace, you're going to see where you can find the authorized C3POs. So contact information is there, and you're welcome to engage one or many to determine availability and pricing, any of the criteria that you're looking for in a C3PO. You'll enter into a contractual agreement with them and schedule an assessment according to your schedule and their schedule. And that becomes really a bilateral agreement between the organization seeking assessment or certification, and the C3PO. We don't involved in that until the assessment's finished and we're validating that the assessment was completed and entered in the email. So that's really it's pretty simple. You just go to the CyberAB marketplace and you can see and kind of shop for the C3PO that you're looking for.
So I think my final roundups are, what resources does CyberAB offer to assist organizations seeking certification, in particular, anything that you offer that can help them reduce costs?
So I think the best thing that we offer is a cadre of practitioners who have been following CMMC, who have taken training, passed not a certification exam, but passed the RP or RPA exam, have attended the town halls, and have shown a commitment to CMMC. You understand the requirements. That's really the first place I'd refer folks to. If you go to our marketplace under the RPO or RP section, you can find those individuals who are going to be able to help you get your journey started, help you implement the 800-171, prepare for an assessment. That's better than just going off and finding someone on the street saying, I can help you with CMMC. These folks, these organizations have undergone a background check. Again, have taken a baseline level of training. We're looking to reinvigorate the RP program once the final rule is finished and CMMC is up and running. But for now, it's still the best place to start. And there are a lot of folks who offer other ancillary training and advice. There's law firms out there who've got great analyses of the rule itself and the regulatory implications. So there is a little out there. And I think I'll end with that notion. There's no reason that any defense contractor should go down this road alone. There's plenty of help from the practitioner cadre, the C3POs, the outside organization, technology companies, MSPs, are all there to help. And so I would certainly avail myself of them if I were in their shoes.
And my very last question for you is, you get a lot of questions that are technical, very narrow on SIMs and MSP level 2 requirements, etc. Can you point to a process or a methodology? How can organizations get clarifications from CyberAB on these specific and often complex issues from CyberAB? Can they forward questions to you? Any help that you can extend?
So I'll have more to say on this, I think, once the final rule is out. Right now, I would refer folks to DoD's procurement toolbox. And this is under the acquisition and sustainment section of DoD. So this is DCMA. On their website, they've got essentially an FAQ section where they address a lot of technical control questions. It's generally not an accreditation body's role to kind of provide technical interpretation of things like that, Sanjeev. However, given our anticipated role in rendering decisions on appeals, we might find ourselves in a technical adjudication position. If so, we will probably, whether it's a body of knowledge or some type of purpose of information to help people understand some of these, in some cases, intricate technical questions. And as technology evolves, there's not just one way to meet this security requirement in 800-171. There could be many approaches. And we do think the ecosystem and the DIB need to understand what's proven successful, what hasn't. So if we can play a role there, we'll certainly be looking to.
Well, with that, I'm going to thank you very much for participating. And I will offer up to the participants in this webinar that is hosting, as it has for the past several years, annual CMMC Day. It's on October 1st. I think over 15 C3PAOs and dozens of practitioners are going to be there. So it's a great opportunity for you to engage one-on-one with those practitioners and C3POs to ask your specific questions and get them answered. I want to thank you again on behalf of all the participants in this webinar and on behalf of Prevail for the yeoman's work that you have done and for taking the time to be with us today. So thank you very much. And thanks again, Matt, and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.